Before I get started, I just want to let you guys know that issues 1 through 4 of my comic Dark Phantom are available now on Comixology and Gumroad, with issue 5 coming soon. We've worked really hard on it, and it would mean a lot to me if you would check it out. Links in the description. Thanks, and let's get on with the video. Hey, welcome to Class Act Media. I'm Jack, and hey, have you noticed that I like superheroes? Yeah, it's not something I talk about a lot on here, but I actually kinda a little bit think superheroes are okay. I used this joke at the beginning of my last video, but I don't care, nobody watched it anyway. So, lately, as a superhero fan, I've kinda been living in paradise. I can't remember a time when superheroes were this popular, with a new movie, TV show, or video game based on my beloved comic books being announced almost every day. But for a while, something's been nagging at me, and I think it's finally time to say it. Okay, you've read the title of the video, no sense beating around the bush, and I admit it, the title is a bit of an exaggeration, but I do think the superhero genre in the mainstream is quickly reaching a dangerous point of no return. But first, let's take a step back and try to figure out how superheroes and comedy became so widely linked together in the mainstream in the first place. Well, obviously, the earliest example I can think of is the Adam West Batman show. If the stories are to be believed, I don't know, I didn't exist yet when this show was on the air, but it was incredibly divisive. General audiences loved it. Most people at the time didn't really know much about Batman, so they just thought this is how he's supposed to be. Comic book fans, meanwhile, hated it, as they thought it was making a mockery of the previous dark and serious character. Things only got worse as the campiness of the show started leaking its way into the comics, although you can partially blame the Comics Code Authority for that. That's a long story that has nothing to do with this, so just look it up if you're not familiar. It's kind of hard to fathom considering how beloved the show is these days, but back then it was seen as pretty widely despised by comic readers. Now that pretty much the whole world knows that Batman is supposed to be serious, most fans have come around on the old show, now that it's not really tarnishing any legacy. And for a long period after that, superhero properties were taken more seriously. Tim Burton's Batman and Richard Donner's Superman are great examples, and they pretty much redefined the tones of those characters for an entire generation of non-comic readers. During this time, comedies were almost seen as the worst kind of superhero movies. Stuff like Superman 3, Fantastic Four, and Green Lantern all took more comedic approaches and were all critically panned, although they had their own set of problems beyond just the tone. So, when did things change? Well, ironically, I think it once again goes back to Batman. The earliest example in recent memory I can think of a major superhero property going in a more comedic direction is the show Batman the Brave and the Bold. This was a show from 2008 and served as a kind of loving send-up to the more wacky, cheesy Silver Age of comics. Now, please don't misunderstand, I really like this show. The character designs are great, and it feels like a true love letter to DC Comics. Best of all, while the scenarios and plots may be goofy and over the top, Batman and the other heroes aren't treated like jokes. They're all very competent, and the show isn't afraid to get serious when it needs to. The show I really have a problem with came in 2013, the infamous Teen Titans Go! Now, I think everything that can ever be said about this show has been said a million times over, so I'll just keep this part brief. Where Brave and the Bold did its best to pay respects to what came before it and was willing to take itself relatively seriously, TTG reveled in its silliness. It constantly makes fun of itself and the fans of the comics in the original Teen Titans show, mocking the very idea of ever taking anything even remotely seriously. For years after the show started airing, it was unanimously hated across the board. But these days, I've started to see a fair amount of people coming around to it. It seems like general audiences are more and more starting to come around on the idea of superhero stories taking themselves less seriously. And I think that can pretty much all be attributed to one little movie that came out in 2014 called Guardians of the Galaxy. Up to that point, a lot of Marvel movies included comedic elements. The characters made quips and whatnot, but most of the time the stories were more action and character focus as opposed to comedy. Guardians of the Galaxy was the first to put comedy at the forefront, and unlike Teen Titans Go, it was met with universal praise, and I think that's for a couple reasons. One, even though it treated its characters like goofballs, it at least took the stakes seriously. And two, nobody knew who the Guardians of the Galaxy were. With Teen Titans Go, there was a whole generation of people who grew up with the comics and the original cartoon who saw the show as a betrayal of their childhood. But And I cannot stress this enough, nobody cared one single iota about the Guardians of the Galaxy. Before the movie, I never met a single person who knew anything about the Guardians, and that includes comic book readers. The lack of any general knowledge or love for these characters allowed James Gunn to really do whatever he wanted with the lore and the tone. More or less the entire movie is not accurate to the comics, he made most of it up. And then Guardians of the Galaxy made $772 million. This pretty much cemented the new direction Marvel would go in, shifting the tone of most of their movies to comedy. The Ant-Man movies, the Spider-Man movies, Thor Ragnarok, all these movies have taken the mantra of don't take it too seriously, and have, for the most part, seen huge success at the box office. And even though I'm making a video complaining about the comedy, I actually really love most of these movies. So why do I think it's a problem? Well, to put it simply, I don't think superheroes are inherently comedic. The show that got me into superheroes in the first place, Batman the Animated Series, is a perfect example. In that show, yeah, there were some undeniably goofy scenarios, and you can tell that the writers were having fun and probably laughing between themselves when creating it. But the show never treated them as goofy. When Batman was in these situations, they were treated as real, serious life or death moments. And, in my opinion, that's a work of a truly great superhero story. Yeah, the adventures they go on, from our perspective, are kinda ridiculous, but the writing is confident enough in itself that it makes us take them seriously. In a lot of cases, I see comedy as kind of a fallback crutch used by writers who aren't all that confident in their ideas, so they can just say, haha, yeah, no, you weren't supposed to take that seriously, that was a joke. For example, let's take a look at Thor's story in Avengers Endgame. In that movie, he probably has the heaviest and most emotional arc. His overconfidence caused the death of not only half of his people, but half of all life in the universe. When we catch up with him 5 years later, he's understandably a complete mess. But strangely, this is mostly played for comedy. What really should have been one of the biggest emotional through lines of the movie boils down to, haha, he's fat now. Hulk's story too. For several movies up to that point, they had dealt with the story of Bruce Banner and Hulk struggling to coexist in one body. But in Endgame, it's just like, oh, he's better now, and dabs, also. Maybe it's a lack of confidence, or maybe it was a Disney executive behind the scenes saying, this is too heavy, the kids won't want to buy toys of it. Make it funnier. Either way, it's disappointing. Even the more emotional elements of that movie would later go on to be mocked in the opening minutes of Spider-Man Far From Home, including the deaths of some of the series' most prominent characters. This immediate deflation of emotional stakes just left me feeling confused for the entire runtime as to what tone the movie was trying to have. Look, I'm not gonna sit here and say I want all superhero movies to be serious, because that kind of thinking gives us those drab, dull comic book movies that are afraid to include any semblance of color or comic-accurate costume design. But surely there's a middle ground. Can't we have moments of levity while still taking the plot and stakes seriously? The Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies seem to handle this pretty well. I really feel like superhero movies and TV shows start to really make a change, and soon, before the genre is associated forever with mindless popcorn action schlock that will make you chuckle a few times and then immediately delete from your memory. We've already seen comic book movies like Joker shying away from the more comic booky aspects of its source material, probably out of some sort of embarrassment of being associated with other superhero movies. That's tragic to me. Superheroes mean more to me than words can express, and I just wish the world could see them the way I do. But for now, all I can do is whine on YouTube and hope things change soon. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, consider subscribing and turning on the bell for notifications. If you really love me, consider checking out my Patreon. You can follow me on Twitter for updates. I'm at @ClassAct_media because @ClassActMedia is already taken. Links to everything are in the description. I'll see you guys later.